So sometimes I think we tend to look at like big picture solutions, which are also important. Banning fossil fuels is a great idea. But there are these also small things that we can do in our own immediate environment, which is just like finding a space in your heart to be reverent for the environment into which you were born, that you're a part of it too, that we are all a part of that too. Those butterflies and birds and hummingbirds are not separate from us. They're part of our Earth family.
I'm so excited for you to hear this conversation with my dear friend Delila Olsson. During the pandemic, she wrote this incredible book called Fred the Monarch, a tale of transformation and hope. Our conversation is off the charts. These 2 hours flew by, and this part one is going to have you on the edge of your seat with just connection and conversation around this campfire. That is exactly why I do this platform. So grab your cannoli, grab your coffee. Here we go. I'm so excited for you to hear part one of my conversation with Delila Olsson. Hold your seat. Here we go. Delila?
Hi. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So you can hear me, right?
I can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining me on my Fifi Uncensored podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. You and I met a decade ago in 2011, the summer of 2011, when I was up in Portland filming a show. And through a mutual friend of ours, Karen, we had the delight of meeting one another, and I fell madly in love with you right from the get-go because you're the sweetest, most beautiful heart, and you're so smart and so funny. And we started working together actually back then because of writing and social media. And social media, that seems like, no pun intended, a decade ago, but like a dinosaur age ago, because so much has shifted in the last decade, just alone with social media, promoting ourselves, all the things. And especially now with the pandemic, which is why the catalyst for us connecting here on the podcast, because I want to highlight you and celebrate you as an author of this beautiful book, Fred the Monarch.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, what a sweet, sweet read. So I want to just kick right off and go, I don't know if you know this or if I told you this, but monarch butterflies are a big thing in my life.
I did not know that. And it's amazing, since I wrote the book, how many people have mentioned to me that they have a special relationship to butterflies. You know how it goes. It's like you put something out into the universe and suddenly people start responding with their own experiences, which is lovely.
100%. And it's so interesting to me that how the pandemic caused so many responses, so many knee-jerk reactions, so many rock in the water effects, and how people process their emotions and their quiet alone time, and how they either manifested and transformed in a positive way versus maybe not so much because of the heartache of separation or the heartache of loss, be it their loved ones or fiscal opportunities, or just a shift that nobody could ever prepare themselves for in our current time, so to speak. So, here you are a Montessori school administrator, and I want to just touch base a little bit about your life before it turned into you creating this book. How long have you been in the Montessori school system and being an administrator?
Well, I've been involved in Montessori education since I was 21, and I'm almost 60, so do the math, a long time. And I've been involved in school administration in some capacity for maybe about this last 10 years or 10 or 15. And I lead a small school community in Portland, Oregon, where I live. Small, meaning we probably have about 250 students in our community and 2 campuses. And, you know, it's a huge part of my life. It's my chosen work. It's my life's work. And so for me, at the time of the pandemic, of course, you know, March 13th, 2020 will forever be emblazoned in my mind because that's the day that we closed our school. We just thought maybe we were having an extra week of spring break. And then, you know, and then we all know what happened after that. The lockdown happened. And so I think what you were saying a minute ago about, you know, people either sort of became transformed through the experience or maybe that it was difficult, that both were true for me. The isolation was difficult and depressing, and I struggled a lot with my mental state. And because I live alone. And so it was like triple isolation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm an introvert, but it's different to choose to be alone than to be forced to be alone by circumstances. So when this caterpillar came to me, it gave me this, not only something to observe, but a sense of having something else going on in my environment.
Connection,
right. And I think a lot of times in Western culture, especially, we don't necessarily think about those connections with other creatures who share our ecosystems, you know, but there is connection, there's relationship to be had. And so for me, that was, it was a very hopeful and a very, very timely thing because I was struggling so much with the isolation.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about, you know, when we touch on nature and purpose and connection and the ecosystem and balance. I personally have a great connection to nature. I have since I was a little girl. You certainly live in an area where you are surrounded by, you know, powerful. Oregon is a very powerful environment. So is California. I mean, all parts of the world are. It's a matter of, you know, how do you integrate that in your daily life? You know, do you put your hands in the earth? Do you pay attention to the way the sky looks? Do you look at the greenery around you? Do you see the abundance that's growing around you? What part are you putting back into the land to give back? And I know myself personally growing up around people who loved giving back to land and loved giving us opportunities to be in summer camps and places where we really got to learn these opportunities to be living in the middle of forests in northern Wisconsin, in our case. Excuse me. And then I got to do expeditions in my mid-teens and later on. I really it's just a core thing. So when I read your book, and then to correlate it with the pandemic and isolation and purpose and connection and having something to look forward to, that then caused you to, you know, even though you were already journalizing as you made mention of it, that it gave you a different sense of purpose that you couldn't have seen coming.
Right.
And what a beautiful way to teach, being in the education system without it necessarily being your original intention. Because transformation and observation and learning from experience, i.e. your experience with Fred and the caterpillar, is such a beautiful teachable moment on so many levels. You know, because transformation is like a layered onion. It's not just one thing, it's so many things, and it's always ever changing, as you talk about. It's funny, as I was taking notes while reading your book, I was writing down words, and then those words would come up later in your book, and I'd be like, oh my God, I can't wait to talk to you.
Yeah.
And butterflies are just such a powerful part of that, and all of the things that we source for things like a butterfly or a hummingbird or a bee, or all the things that then pollinate and carry forth and show us life. So you had this opportunity gifted to you, be it a friend who gifted you a milkweed plant.
Right.
And that milkweed plant came from Santa Cruz, right? Yeah. And you realized in receiving this gift that there was a caterpillar on one of the leaves.
Yeah.
And that caterpillar turned into your named friend called Fred.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
You know, the thing about it is that I think on the topic of transformation, right, that happens right under our noses all the time, because we are intrinsically transformative creatures, just like all of the universe. I started doing, and you'll remember this, I started posting on Facebook. I got and just, you know, little photos with my iPhone. And suddenly this little creature had like a fan club of people. I was getting private messages from people saying, what's going on with Fred? Post more photos, you know? So I realized that the lesson that this little creature came to teach, or that I believe that's what happened, it wasn't just for me. It was for all these people who were also in lockdown or some version of isolation, and also needing to remember, I think, the web of connection, you know, into which we are all held. I mean, if in the biggest sense, and then in this minute example, it's such a beautiful thing. We lose track of that, I think. Obviously, we have, you know, I don't know if you know this, but the monarch was just added to the list of endangered species just in the last few weeks. And which is so sad, but many species are added every year because we have not been paying attention to the lessons of the animals and the plants, and we have not been good stewards of the beautiful earth that we were given for a home. And so I think that story is timely in that regard as well. You know, that the time may come where the transformation of the monarch no longer occurs because of us. So I think that, you know, Fred had many lessons to teach and has many lessons to teach.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the power of nature and life, taking it out of the human form.
Yeah.
And how it really has such a much more powerful, it's funny, monarchs are flying in my front yard right now as we converse.
I love it.
They're literally dancing with each other right now, like flirting and dancing and floating about. Yeah. And it was really important for me to create landscape that's gotten pretty trashed from two puppies who are also teaching life right now. I think mostly about social racism issues, but unconsciously. But to the point where, you know, it was really important to me, even though I didn't do actual research, like what plants will serve monarchs, hummingbirds, bees, those things, but to create a landscape that would serve as a small private dog park in our front yard that in turn would serve a lot of other life. And to see how that's manifested, that brings great joy as I sit in my office desk and look out this window with all this greenery that I'm so blessed to have like you're surrounded with greenery and blessed to have. And I know that that's a gift, and I don't take it for granted ever, because not everybody is surrounded with life in that way. Some people are surrounded with dirt, and some people are surrounded with desert, and some people are surrounded with cement, and some people are even lucky if they have time to look up and look at the sky because they're struggling to find a droplet of water or the next meal, or the next sense of change to get through. So I understand that this is a very, what they correlate as a first world, conversation. But in that powerful first world conversation, even those who have a little bit more breathing, whatever that means in the big space of the world, a conversation like this is so, to me, very, very important. Like every summer comes along and my heartstrings are pulled to go back to North Woods, Wisconsin, to give back and serve and raise young girls up. And also to be in the middle of Mother Nature, where I would follow the stars at night by the tree lines and without any other source of light, with the sense of a double battery, a double A battery getting me from point A to point Z. So for me, I think this is an important conversation that is a way of showing whether it's climate change, connection, transformation, the importance of paying attention, staying present, how you stayed present in this relationship you created with this little creature that only maybe in our educational system, maybe do kids get exposed to these kind of things in an early stage of life, depending upon the educational system.
Yeah. I mean, we raise butterflies every year in our Montessori classrooms. We get the larvae and set up the tents, and it's beautiful. And when I was a classroom teacher, I went through that process many times with children. But because I was the adult who understands the importance of observation, who grew up with a lot of nature like you did, I was still the teacher who was flitting around doing all of my millions of things. And this was the first time I had really slowed down myself and observed the whole process. The children did it. They journaled about it. We had class discussions about it, but this was like front row seat to this performance that was, happening just for me on my dining room table. And it was amazing. And I think it's like so much of what happens in my life with symbols and tiny little synchronicities get my attention long enough for me to say, oh, I wonder what this is about. And then to allow it to sort of wash over me and bring whatever kind of awareness. That's the way that I look at the world. I know that that's the way that you look at the world as well. And I would say that what happens concurrent with all these different environments that you referred to, people who are either, maybe they don't have a natural environment accessible, they're living in concrete, in the concrete jungle, many of us, many people, many humans. But there are also the people who are out there waging war with their natural environment. They're out there with poison to kill everything that doesn't look right to them. They're killing all the dandelions. And by the way, the dandelions are the first food for bees in the spring. Because there's some kind of weird idea about having a manicured lawn rather than a outdoor space that is home for pollinators. And I think that if everybody understood that if you attract the bees and the butterflies and the hummingbirds, you are doing your part to take care of the planet, and it's easy. It does not require, if everybody just did that, we'd be in a different situation than we are in. If we just stopped dumping chemicals on the natural landscape, we would be in a different situation that we're in, I think. So sometimes I think we tend to look at like big picture solutions, which are also important. Banning fossil fuels is a great idea. But there are these also small things that we can do in our own immediate environment, which is just like finding a space in your heart to be reverent for the environment into which you were born, that you're a part of it too, that we are all a part of that too. Those butterflies and birds and hummingbirds are not separate from us. They're part of our earth family. And
100%.
yeah.
No, 100%. And we all need one another. We're all interconnected. It is the old adage of one hand needs to wash the other. And without this connection, this sourcing, and consciousness, that this will not thrive in the manner it deserves, including humanity, which is a loosely used term these days. But in regards to nature, in regards to supporting the ecosystem and the tundras that we're surrounded by, you don't have to be a homeowner. You could literally have a front door that you put a pot out and you put your hands in the soil and you give life to whatever it is that stimulates you, that stimulates a desire for you to do that, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable or a flower or a tree, because whether it's you're giving others something to smile over or other life to source from, or you're adding to the oxygen in the world, or just that evolution of life in general. It's a birthing process. I literally cry over trees that have to be uprooted, or that like I am that person. I think at a certain point early on when we bought our property, and there were a couple of trees that we were making decisions to move. Maybe it was because of an electrical wire, for safety purposes, so it wouldn't maybe interrupt and cause a fire potentially. If my heart would ache. I remember these big trees that were in our courtyard that were birds of paradise that towered over into our courtyard that I loved. But my husband was like, no, we need to do something else. And I remember coming home one day and they were all lined up in the backyard. And I felt like, I couldn't catch my breath. I didn't know whether to cry or, to throw up. I really felt like I had been violated, that they had been violated, and I was part of their protection. I thank God that their roots came back at the time, like, we're more powerful than you, and we will show you. I came to understand and agree that at one point it was better for the foundation and everything for them not to be birthed into that close to our house. And at that point I was able to let go, but at the same time, and then plant other things. But it is really a sense of like, I don't know if the DNA is born with that connection or if it's taught or it's a combination. But I really think it is a combination. And I really think being taught is a powerful thing of showing, and why this book is so important to me to share and highlight, and you as the author highlight your experience, because it's one very little experience that's so powerfully huge.
Yeah. My friend Maris, who gave me the first milkweed, traveled through Portland a couple weeks ago. She brought me another milkweed, and on it was another caterpillar. We were at the car, and she said, "Oh my God, look at this! There's another tiny little." So because the last time was October, I had to keep it inside. It was too cold here, but it's been very warm here now. So I actually planted it in my garden out front among the pollinators, and then started taking photos and checking in every day. And a couple of days ago, the butterfly or the caterpillar was no longer there. And I sat for a long time in my garden feeling all the feelings. And then I had this realization, though, about that. This is kind of germane to the tree story that you told, which is it is also a beautiful thing that the contribution of that caterpillar ending up in the belly of a bird or a wasp or whatever is feeding the ecosystem that is feeding us. But as humans, we stand apart from that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't absolutely grieve every time that we lose someone that we love. We should, but there's also this higher ideal of like, we are also in a cycle, and people are born and people live and people die, and death is not necessarily the worst thing. I would say the worst thing might be becoming aware that you're not contributing.
Yeah.
Because all of the other creatures on Earth contribute, all of them. And so that caterpillar, this time around, won't become a butterfly, but it became food for another creature, which contributes to the ecosystem. And I think humans in general, we can really benefit from talking about and thinking about what are the ways that we can start giving rather than only taking, because we take a lot and we don't give much to the overall family of things, I would say.
Oh my goodness. Well, yes, yes, and yes. You know, as you know, being a part of a community, and again, I use that term loosely, called Hollywood. And I don't mean that with any disdain. I mean that with being who I am. And no matter how much success I've experienced or how many people and places and things I've seen and gone, been able to leave my artistry on the floor, on the cell, or in the television that screen that comes through your home or what, there's still that sense of, oh my God, there's so much more that I need to excavate, to contribute, to be a part of. I mean, financial freedom is still important to me. Time freedom is still important to me, but there's so much more to me that's so much more than, how many awards you have on a shelf to dust off. Because guess what? At the end of the day, nobody cares. Truly, it doesn't. It's like a fleeting moment. And this is to the point of what you're saying, that life is ever cycling through, and those things too will shift. You'll have your high, and then you'll be bye-bye. So like, to hold on to those things that you think your ego thinks is ever so important is fleeting. And to me, to be able to look at these huge trees that I know have been here for 60 or 100 years that stand across the street from me, hello, way more powerful than any Academy Award or any studio system or whatever. And again, I don't denounce what I've been a part of contributing to, but I know that there's something so much greater that, in regards to transformation, why this platform for me is so important is to have real, authentic conversations that matter, which is why highlighting a story, a conversation, a beautiful writer, a beautiful friend, to tell and teach this kind of story that can touch so many lives in a rock and a water effective way, that people thinking and creating more conversations, not in a, oh my God, I saw 3:30 or 5 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 11 o'clock on the news, breaking news. And if we don't solve this water problem right now, we're gonna, no, like, let's just take a simple story and let's really break it down. Breathe, take notice. How can you go to your local, wholesale or or even if it is your Home Depot and Lowe's or wherever you need to go, or just go outside and take your shoes off and feel the ground and feel the energy source, because all we are is energy. All this is that we're talking about is energy. And this is not some lulu la la conversation. Money is energy. We are energy. Life is energy. It's all energy. And energy is bigger than all of us. And it's a source, and it's meant to, like we're talking about cycle and exchange, it's meant to be given away and it comes back, and it's that whole exchange, just like life, death, and life and rebirth. You know, you may have seen on my Facebook stories how our mother chose in writing to become a lemon tree before she passed.
So beautiful.
And, you know, for no better way of saying it, it really came down to myself and Randy as taking responsibility for my mom in the sense of the urn. And, you know, we chose that as much as anything else. And it was also during the pandemic that, I mean, literally, like, talk about the timing. You know, she passed on February 23rd, 2020. The country shut down March 13th. I was picking up at the crematorium on March 9th, like right before people would not be able to get into hospitals to see their loved ones, to go through their funeral services and all the things, however they chose to memorialize. And my mother, so intuitively, and being who she was, just was like, yeah, no, I'm going to design this just like so they can have all the things in place and not have any struggle. And then they'll figure it out and they'll honor it as such. And I'll be darned, man, I can look right out this window over my computer, and not only do I see the most favorite color of hers, which is a light vibration color, which is this glazed orange pot, very Mediterranean, with this beautiful new blossoming lemon tree surrounded by wildflowers that are almost as tall as the tree is right now. And we took it one step further, and we took this ashes of all the animals that have passed, because she was such a lover of our animals, and she was certainly me and my sibling teachers. And I like to think that my husband has had the pleasure of, even though he had animals, since being together, we've really come through our own evolution, because those have been our babies. That we finally, after holding on to all these urns over all these years, we decided, amongst the agreement to my siblings, to spread their ashes with her ashes when we actually found the soil that we wanted with the tree we wanted to put in the pot. And talk about an experience, because literally, I mean, these are years in some cases that these ashes have been contained.
Yeah.
To see, like, almost spirit release as the ashes were being spread in the dirt. And again, I know people are going to be like, this woman's off her rockers. No, I mean, I'm one soul. But I can tell you, if you're paying attention, you see what you choose to see. But it's about being present to the moment and having those signs, as we talked about earlier, and paying attention. And I wrote that down also in my notes about signs.
Yeah.
And as somebody who definitely is into helping others transform, whatever that means, looking and feeling good, whether it's through beauty, whether it's through health, whether it's through fashion, whether it's through art of any sort, but also loving transforming the land for the better by giving back. You know, I was literally helping somebody yesterday who's going through a process of getting ready to let go of their cat.
Yeah, hard.
So heartbreaking, so hard. I've learned so much. I said I should have started teaching and blogging years and years ago about all the things that we've experienced to help others. And through these evolutions of loss and new life, I have seen signs that I choose to share through these transitions. These monarch butterflies that I refer to are representation of one of our dogs that passed. That's Nikki out there showing us how happy he is, and the girlfriend or wife he has, and the family he's just all. And here we are. We're here. Don't you worry. We're here. The feathers on the ground is another dog, Gwynnie, who always had a connection to birds. So wherever we are, those bird feathers are Gwynnie saying, hello, I'm right here with you, Mama. And what we can learn from these beings is that transformation, yes, does occur. Change is inevitable. I mean, look it. I'm sure you and I have cried buckets beyond buckets when we've lost the ones we've loved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, just like can't pull myself up and out for nothing.
Right.
And I don't even want to think about that. And what I've learned from them is they aren't attached to what we're attached to, because they understand that soul and spirit continues.
Right.
And in order to love and give and continue to love and guide, that will forever be, the more you're at ease and in touch with those concepts, the more you get to experience in a present state, and then recognize those things around you when they show up, going, oh my God, there's Nikki. Oh my God, there's Gwynnie. Oh my God, there's Fred, or Fred's, whatever, right?
Exactly. Well, you're definitely your mother's daughter. And I love your story. You and I write a lot about some similar things. We both know that. We process in writing. We love story. And to me, Felicia, that's a huge contribution that you're making, because the only really way for us as a culture to change the way that we think about things like life and death is through story. And so, yes, of course, we grieve that which we love. I still grieve the people who are gone and the animals who are gone. And at the same time, the life that they lived is what is the most important thing. And the ongoing presence that we feel when we're paying attention, that the soul is transformed in state of being, but not gone. Those stories need to be told, because I think that we need to, as culturally, unpack this idea of death as some kind of final departure and being attached to that person who's lying in a tomb or whatever. But the lemon tree, as representative of your mother, wrote the story of her own transition, is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And people need to understand that you can do that we all have the opportunity to do that. I used to joke with my son when he was little, and that, I gave him, there's a great episode of Northern Exposure, which is our favorite show of all time. And lots of weavings of indigenous wisdom in that show. And there's this great show where it's about throwing big things like pianos and into the forest and reclaimed life, right? And so I gave my son, I said, if you want to shoot me out of a cannon when I'm dead, it's fine. And whatever. But just don't, and whatever you do, don't put any embalming fluid in my body. Don't do that. If you want to shoot me into a forest, that's fine. My mom was a really irreverent woman, deeply, deeply spiritual person, person of deep faith, but totally irreverent. She would say, so-and-so croaked. She would say, like, when I croak, I want you to, And some people were really offended by that. And I thought it was actually great that she had a lightness of humor.
Mhm.
And her death was heavy. It wasn't humorous. It was difficult. My mother died of brain cancer, and it was traumatic for everyone. At the same time, underneath that, I knew her and her relationship to death, and that she was going to be okay. And that if we keep telling these stories, like the lemon tree or the wedding, I get symbols and signs from my mother all the time. And sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're not, but they're always important. And that's, I think, those are the stories to tell, because it reinforces that awareness that we're part of the web. Just like every creature is transformative, we are too. And I think it's important to not attach to the grief rituals too much, because those can be pretty heavy, and people get stuck in that. People get stuck in hanging on to that object that represents the person, but it isn't the person. It's an object. The person was a living, breathing spirit, just like the butterfly or the hummingbird. That's
So
what
speaking,
those are important.
No, it's absolutely true, and it's interesting because when you were just talking and you were talking about your mother and talking about telling story and writing, I don't know if you knew this, but my mom was a writer. She was an English teacher.
I
and
did
the head of
that.
and the head of the English departments, and had her master's in journalism and did PR, and she always wanted us to write scripts together and be a team in Hollywood. And but what I think about is even relative to talking about relationships. It's interesting how there were definitely times that, as a mother-daughter relationship, it wasn't always seamless. It wasn't always sweet. There were some very tough moments. And yet I think it's interesting and sweet that she is the lemon tree that I love looking out at in every day, no matter what window, exiting the house, coming in the house, always wanting to see. I just think it's wildly divinely designed by her.
No doubt. And I think it's a bigger conversation when we start talking about relationship. In the same way that we think we can control the ecosystem by killing the dandelions that are, for whatever reason, they don't fit with the lawn. We think we can control each other. And we attach so deeply. I attach so deeply to the people that I love. It's my life work, I'm convinced, to be able to always hold the people that I love with an open hand, recognizing that really the moment is just this moment that we have. We don't know if we have another one after this. And so I'm always having to work internally with myself to say, where is the joy in this moment? How can I be fully present to this person right now? Because I don't know that I'll have another moment with them. And we don't know that, but we try. And, that's why religion is so popular, right? Everyone wants to know what's going to happen when you die. I loved what Betty White said. When she was asked this question, she said, well, my mother used to say that there are lots of people who will tell you that they know what's going to happen when you die. But she said, they're lying. Nobody knows. Only you know at the moment of death what happens. But everybody buys into religion. Why? Because there's a nice little packaged explanation of what happens when you die. It's, of course, entirely made up because nobody actually knows. But that's how much we want to control the trajectory of our lives. We want people that we love not to leave, and we want things not to change. And it's a juxtaposition, because we are innately transformative beings living in a transformative universe where everything is continuously changing. We can't escape it.
We can't escape it. The only things that we know for sure are inevitable are change and death.
Yeah. Right. A change of state. Right.
A change of state. And, it's interesting. So I don't know, obviously in your world, the Montessori world, the schools, what changes most are probably the evolution of your children that come through. I don't know if teachers come and go. I'm sure they do. But I would imagine as you see kids grow, graduate, move on, that can't be easy. I know that when I was a camp counselor, people still laugh today and talk about, my loyalty and connection to my girls. Yeah. Little did I know between the ages of 18 and 23 that was really going to be the opportunity for me to become a mother. Yeah. And foundationally source myself into that sense of responsibility, commitment, attachment, teaching, inspiring, and creating my own sense of legacy in their brain and their hearts. But the heart connection, yeah. The ache and the pain, and so I think back again to your book, and I think to you as an administrator and your responsibility and your love for what you do and the passion and the commitment that you've made. And, how is that for you to, see children? It must make you swell with glee to see children thrive and see teachers do well in teaching and being effective and having a strong environment that keeps manifesting that. But do you want to speak on that from your perspective?
Yeah. So the Montessori approach is unique in some ways. One way is that Maria Montessori had the basic premise is that children learn through spontaneous engagement with their environment, not through an adult, through the environment. So there's a lot of consideration given to preparing the environment, and not only the classroom, the home and the outdoor space and all the places where children live and grow, so that really to support this spontaneous engagement, which allows them to internalize all of the important messages from nature and from their own inner nature too, when they relate to people and to things and to experiences. Another key thing is that we keep our children, generally speaking, for 3-year cycles. So at my school, most children start at age 3, and they're with us for at least 3 years. But sometimes they're with us for 9 years, and they stay with us till 6th grade. And you should see me on the day when those 6th graders are leaving. I'm a mess because it's so beautiful and they're so beautiful. And it's a combination of being so proud of who they are, the contributions that they've made in my community, in our community, and recognizing that these precious souls are the change makers because they've had these environments and parents and teachers who are deeply devoted to finding their own path, right? Because it's a very individual thing, learning and growing. And school can either be a source of joy and learning, or it can be a source of stress if it's too much of an adult focused experience. So, the people that tend to be drawn to this work are people who kind of get that. Which means we don't have a lot of turnover of teachers because it's a pretty lovely approach and it's a very strong community. But with that said, teachers are also very tired right now after a couple of years of COVID and all of the extraneous aspects of that. But Did I even answer your question? I feel like I went off.
Absolutely. And it's ironic because you're leading into something that I wanted to talk about regarding the pandemic and regarding education and regarding this evolution of what we're seeing worldwide. I certainly know I can speak on Los Angeles right now, the thousands and thousands of kids that are not returning to school, that are not registered to return, and they do not know if it's, because they're being homeschooled, because their parents can't afford, because these kids need to be working and helping their families make a living. They don't know if it's an immigration situation. They don't know. They can't put their finger on it. And it's heartbreaking because you think to the future, and as many children right now that we know are going to be change makers, and that we hope and knock on wood that this too shall pass, no pun intended, that the phoenix, so to speak, will rise above all of the struggles. And look, for any of us who have been challenged in life, we know that that's possible. And we know that there are many ways to walk through that door and solve a problem. And that's probably a lot to do with the Montessori kind of approach of finding your own voice and finding your own path and finding your own solving problems to become who you want to evolve into, the butterfly that you're here to become, so to speak.
And recognizing the opportunity.
Pardon?
Recognizing the opportunity. This is not a popular opinion that I'm about to give you, but for all of the talk among educators and parents throughout this country, for sure, probably throughout the world, it's the emphasis tends to be on what has the child lost? Oh, they didn't learn their multiplication tables on time or something. To me, that is a ridiculous perspective, because they will all learn how to read and write. They'll all learn how to do multiplication. They'll all learn about fractions and long division and all the things. They'll learn those things. But perhaps a gift of the pandemic is that the child, the universal child, has become more adaptable, more resilient. For some children, it meant a loss of a lot of freedom, which is a very sad thing. But I do still think, if we look at this from an evolutionary standpoint, there are lessons to be learned, even in these times of great adversity. The children I really feel for are the ones who couldn't be in school and they needed that for their food. That's where they're getting their daily meals. That might be where they're getting most of their nurturing. And I am not, I can't, that's horrible. At the same
I agree with you.
Collectively though, the problem that we're facing, in my opinion, is not that kids aren't learning academics on a schedule. That's not the important thing. The important thing that children need to learn is connection. They need to know that they're part of a bigger whole. They need to learn social responsibility and what it means to sometimes prioritize the needs of others above your own. And those are all lessons that the pandemic brought. Really big lessons, big life lessons that change perspectives for the long term, I think.
It's very interesting you touch on that, because even though I'm not in the education system per se, I couldn't agree with you more. Granted, I don't have children that are being affected directly, so it could sound like a very selfish statement, because I could have plenty of people or parents who listen to this and go, what could you possibly know? You've never had a child. Well, I've heard that statement plenty over the years, so it's not for lack of desire. Let me just put that on the table. I would have loved all 5 of my pregnancies to have gone through successfully, so let's just call it spade a spade. But with that said, I probably was teaching sooner and being more responsible for children than anybody who went down that path as a parent. And that doesn't make me better or right or wrong. It just is like, look I care about children. I care about our future. And, I put that kind of energy even into my young nieces right now, who I know are going to be powerful change makers. And I talk to them very realistically about what they're capable of doing, the rock and the water effect with their passions and their purpose. And if I have the opportunity to do that with any other parents, kids that knew me from whenever going forth, they know where to find me. In regards to evolution, learning, life lessons, life lessons, connection, learning to live together, learning that we're all in this together. I'll make references to like in my world of my career. When you walk into a makeup trailer, you know who has those life lessons and those skills and who doesn't. Right from the get-go, I can smell it. And what people don't understand amongst my peer group is the importance of that.
Yeah.
And my peers who know me since I was a young woman, a young girl, and going forward, one of the biggest reasons why the camp that we went to, so that has so many years of success, over 75 years now, as an all-girls camp up in northern Wisconsin by the name of Camp Nicolay for Girls, is because that's the motto, learning to live together. So when you have to be responsible for 8 or 10 or 12 other peers of yours that is not your bloodline, but you're sharing a space with, and you have to figure out how to make this train work and go forward together, or maybe it's going to go sideways today, or maybe it's going to go up tomorrow. But you have to figure out how to, as a community and as a familia, as a whatever you think of it as, a unit, to go through harmoniously, peacefully, structurally together. You learn lots of foundational lessons from the ages of 7 to 15. And then as a camp counselor between the ages of 18 on up, you learn how to make that go forward too. And certainly the owners certainly got it because they were teachers. And then when they started that camp, they understood it as a couple, the foundation, and talk about the seeds planted in the rock and the water effect, and that how that continues to this day and will go on forever, and why there's so much legacy with that camp, which also inspired me this platform, because that place gave me my voice and gave me my creativity, and certainly it did for my family. But it gave me a different source of confidence and a different source of finding my own individualism. But with that, the ability to know how to lead, how to show, how to inspire, how to teach, and collectively come together and move together as a unit. So when I see that doesn't work in a professional environment, it's because those adults, and I use that term loosely, haven't been taught those very foundational skill sets, and they have never had to play in the sandbox with others in a manner that's been successful. And they're certainly not gonna, I don't even know they can recognize or not. And with such an ego-driven business, when it's a me world, no matter what position you're in, there's going to be a lot more breakdown potentially for something that actually elegantly gets created every day, what I call the perfect wheel, with all these experts coming together and making this thing happen, which we do. But when you really dissect the animal and the machine, you can see how it could be broken down really quickly if it was reliant on one or another for the lack of their ability to communicate, their ability to share, their ability to inspire, their ability to highlight, their ability to raise up, because they're so caught up in their own thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we are, as humans, uniquely egocentric beings. And I think that if for you, it was this beautiful camp experience. For some children, it's a Montessori experience. For some people, it's being raised in a family where the value around social responsibility equalizes every person's importance. It can be a lot of different things. Sometimes it's just having one good teacher. But I think that it has to be an effort. If you don't do the work to think about perspective taking, like what would it be like in somebody else's shoes? And then you just remain that kind of egocentric person. It's no surprise that one of the big topics in the United States right now is narcissism, right? Because a lot of humans are narcissists who haven't developed perspective taking, aren't really curious about what it's like to stand in somebody else's shoes, would rather have power than unity. That's what's wrong with the government. They would rather have power than unity. And it's so sad because without some unity consciousness, we're screwed in terms of the future of our planet. And yet people still are grabbing for the power, not recognizing that is a fleeting reward.
Yeah, well, greed, it comes down to greed. And, the irony of us preemptively talking about change and death is like, you can't take that with you.
No.
You cannot, so your destruction is what you're going to take with you. That's going to be your legacy. So it's interesting that you touch on that, because I was actually raised in a very social, aware household. I mean, I remember as a child of the ages of your Montessori school kids, being raised as we're of the same age, being raised during the era of the Kennedys in office and being killed, and Martin Luther King being killed, and the Vietnam War, and women's rights, social rights, civil rights, voting rights for women and people of color, all the things that evolved in the 60s and 70s, and being very directly impacted by that. I mean, I was a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid flying across the country from Chicago to New York to meet our father, who was, doing his one of 4 visits to New York every year, when my mom leaned down in the airport at O'Hare and said, if this plane that we're about to board gets hijacked, and this is 1967, 8, this plane gets hijacked, you're not Jewish, you're Italian.
Yeah.
We're in the United States of America. People don't realize, with all of our diversity and inclusivity issues, there's a lot of diversity and inclusivity issues. It's that we have to work together. We are all made of the same thing. We may have different beliefs, but at the end of the day, we all came in the same way. We're all going out the same way. And love is love, and connection is connection, and perspective is perspective. And like you said, I personally believe that I have lived so many life experiences for the very fact and the very reason, and again, why I do this platform is, and why I was always told before I did this platform, oh, you should write books about these stories because nobody's going to believe you actually
I think that's one of the people that told you that.
And, I think to myself, nobody necessarily wants to go through all these experiences and have that notch in the wood to talk about. But what it gives you is perspective. It gives you understanding. It gives you empathy. It gives you a platform to speak on and go, whoa, wait a minute. I don't know that you know what you're talking about, not because I'm going to denounce what you have an opinion on. God knows we all know everybody's got the opinion, and like everybody's got, excuse me, assholes. But, are you going to be an asshole about it like a narcissist? Or are you going to be a problem solver like a collective source and be a vessel for change for positive reasons? And writing wise, when it comes to government, and not to make this black or white, and I don't mean black or white as in color, but in, certain areas of practice or belief. On the night of somebody's inauguration, I was sitting on a stage and I had this burning desire to write. And I mean, I'm paying attention to what I'm doing work-wise, but I'm having this burning desire to write because my heart and soul is like, oh my God, we are about to collectively, unbeknownst to most, walk into a domestic violent relationship with an abuser.
I remember your writing about that. So powerful, Felicia. And the story that you just told about the airplane, right? Your mother. This is what I find so interesting. We all have stories like this. Most people don't talk about the stories. In fact, there's a collective commitment that we see now among a fairly significant number of Americans to make sure that children don't ever learn that this country was founded on systemic racism, and that's really the underlying thing that's happening. So we have to work so hard to keep that narrative alive because it's the truth narrative.
Yes.
That's the truth narrative. And we did walk into a domestic violence relationship with that person, and he's still abusing us as much as he can. And I would say that
typical of an abuser, may I add.
Typical, yeah, and you and I both know about that story.
Statistically speaking, which most people don't unless they actually do the work to really understand that animal. And I don't mean him, I mean in general.
I completely hear you on that. But a culture that is so attached to a story that is false. Is it really any surprise that many of us are not paying attention to the subtle lessons of nature, and that we're still trying to kill the plants that we don't like because we don't understand? There's I think that what we've learned in these last years with a violent person at the helm is that it's so important to uncover the truth and to be brave enough to speak up about it. And even when you get feedback from people who cannot handle the truth of the story, and are trying to squash it, it's just so imperative that we continue talking about it. It's the only
to the core. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, I just think it's the only way out. Telling the truthful stories, creating the narrative that's based upon reality, and making sure that our children are given the truth of the matter so that they can go forward and be change makers, and recognizing that there's an opposition to that that's very strong, that creates abuse and control, and that's what we're up against. We're a very divided culture right now, and there are plenty of people that would think of this little story that I wrote as being ridiculously silly and what's the point of it, or people who would think that your podcast is, they're not interested in that dialogue. They're not, and that's okay.
I'm telling you, was that not a great part one of a conversation? Next week's going to be even more incredible, just riveting and really authentically just from the heart, and how we both back and forth just go at just how we feel about all these things: observation, transformation, evolution, humanity, nature, lessons learned, what our part is in all of this, and where we're going from here, and how this goes back to her incredibly beautiful book called Fred the Monarch, A Tale of Transformation and Hope. You must listen, share, subscribe, tell your friends. This is what we're doing here on the Fifi Uncensored podcast, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and life experiences are vast. This is what it's about. So check it out. Tune in, share along the way, and can't wait for you to be more a part of this community. Thank you for joining us. See you next week. Bye for now.
So if we can slow down a little bit, recognize that we're not having an optimal experience by racing around at 100 miles an hour. Maybe do less avoiding of uncomfortable questions about life and death, and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, just vulnerable enough to just sit with it and see what happens as the feelings come. And be willing to look at those things. I think we do a lot as humans, we figured out a lot of ways to avoid looking at these big questions of life and death, food and drugs and sex and shopping and work and name it, right? How many ways can a human be sort of in an unhealthy relationship to experiences or substances that take us away? Whereas nature just sort of invites us in, sit down and see what the bees are up to, or feel your bare feet. I love to walk barefoot in the morning. For me, that's a really restorative practice. It takes 5 minutes. Take your shoes off and go outside and put your feet on the earth. Yeah. Changes the whole day.
There's nothing more special to me than to connect with people who I love, adore, and want to highlight. And on my part 2 of this week's drop on the Camp Fifi Uncensored podcast, I get the pleasure to continue my conversation with my dear friend Delila Olsson, who wrote this beautiful book, Fred the Monarch, A Tale of Transformation and Hope. You must sit down and listen to this conversation and get this book, because it is a treasure. It is sweet. It is an observation of life and how the power of our journey here on this planet and just together is really all about connection. So I look forward to you sitting down and listening to part 2 of my conversation with Delila Olsson. Grab that cannoli, grab that coffee. Here we go.
This is what I find so interesting. We all have stories like this. Most people don't talk about the stories. In fact, there's a collective commitment that we see now among a fairly significant number of Americans to make sure that children don't ever learn that this country was founded on systemic racism, and that's really the underlying thing that's happening. So we have to work so hard to keep that narrative alive, because it's the truth narrative.
Yes.
That's the truth narrative. And we did walk into a domestic violence relationship with that person, and he's still abusing us as much as he can. And I would say that
typical of an abuser, may I add.
Typical, yeah, and you and I both know about that story.
Statistically speaking, which most people don't unless they actually do the work to really understand that animal. And I don't mean him, I mean in general.
I completely hear you on that. But a culture that is so attached to a story that is false, is it really any surprise that many of us are not paying attention to the subtle lessons of nature, and that we're still trying to kill the plants that we don't like because we don't understand? There's I think that what we've learned in these last years with a violent person at the helm is that it's so important to uncover the truth and to be brave enough to speak up about it. And even when you get feedback from people who cannot handle the truth of the story, and are trying to squash it, it's just so imperative that we continue talking about it. It's the only
to the core, Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just think it's the only way out. Telling the truthful stories, creating the narrative that's based upon reality, and making sure that our children are given the truth of the matter so that they can go forward and be change makers, and recognizing that there's an opposition to that that's very strong, that creates abuse and control, and and that's what we're up against. We're a very divided culture right now, and there are plenty of people that would think of this little story that I wrote as being ridiculously silly and what's the point of it, or people who would think that your podcast is, they're not interested in that dialogue. They're not, and that's okay. That's okay.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely, I can speak on that initially, but I'm going to go back for a moment and say, to the point, most people want to do this. Most people don't want to pull back a curtain. Like, they don't want to figure out that there's a wizard behind Wizard of Oz behind the curtain.
Right.
They don't want to excavate. They never chose to be an anthropologist, so they're not going to dig deeper. They don't even want to look in the mirror and see what they really look like, so to speak, as another example, let alone, whether the news is manufactured or not, because it's big business or whatever, to the core, they're still trying to, I believe, there's certain companies I don't believe are trying to tell the truth, and there's certain companies that I think are really trying to tell the truth. And I think that we witnessed in this last handful of years a lot of that trying to be squashed. And when you try to squash freedom of expression, as we know, whether you're an artist, a writer, a person who's just trying to survive things that aren't fair or handled fairly, somebody's got to be courageous, or many have to be courageous. And there's many different ways of doing that. And as just going back to domestic violence, there's no doubt, and I don't like the word victim, so it's not even something I choose to use. It's just like, don't even bring that word in, But for anybody who's attempting to bring to the table the reality of what is and are not believed, and why don't you do something about it, and then you won't have that conversation, or that won't be your situation, or then people don't understand the science of the circumstance in the mind, because, as you said, we're still dealing with this violent abuser as the perfect example of what many, whether it's innocent children or men or women, whomever's in that abusive relationship, whatever stage of life and however that may be, in their career or in home, behind closed doors, people don't realize what it takes to safely get away and to close that door and to not have that monster or that ugly head raise itself up again. And however you want to apply that story, it's layered, but it's what it is statistically. And if you do the work, if you do the science of the mind study of that animal, you will come to realize how that animal, that person, those individuals fall into those statistical categories in black and white in copy.
Yeah.
And it only takes about 5 or 6 pages to read the statistics of the layout of what an abuser is. And but that's a willingness to, like, open your eyes, take the stuff away, the cobwebs, and go, oh my goodness. And going back to your book, it's not silly. No, it's a very simple way of telling not only a very precious story, a very intimate, honest story, and a way of having a very teachable, authentic, again, rock in the water, as I said earlier, effective way of how a powerful tool like this. I mean, as soon as I finished this, I said to my husband, you got to read this book. Mm-hmm. That's what I said. You got to just sit down and take a few minutes to read this book, because it will, I think when art can affect you in a positive way or keep you thinking or wanting to talk about it, then you've done your part. And I don't know that all art that we create, be it in writing or on a canvas or in film or in whatever form we do it, has to always have that effect. But one would hope I don't know that you set out to do that. I think in your case, you set out to just document your experience that evolved into, I can't speak for you, but that evolved into this beautiful book with these beautiful images, that, I mean, just, it's a delicious book it's a great book to gift. It's a great book that should be, I think, in all schools.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I hope that materializes into that, if it's not already on that gravy train right now. And I don't mean because of money. I mean, because, great, take out all the books that are lying or not telling the truth. Then fine, start with something like, Fred the Monarch, because this is a perfect example of all the things that we need to learn from. And it starts with that, go ahead. What were you going to say? Because I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think, my hope with the book, because you're right, writing a book is not a money-making, it's not a money-making scenario. And that's not why I wrote the book. But if it invites people to sit in nature, or maybe to slow down and be more observant, then I think then it's done its work. I think that we can all benefit from that. You and I have talked about this before. The pace of life that is true for so many humans, and I would say particularly in this country where we don't have enough sense to take a nap in the middle of the day like the Italians do, is overwhelming, and it causes us to detach from sort of key aspects of life and the living world. So if we can slow down a little bit, recognize that we're not having an optimal experience by racing around at 100 miles an hour. Maybe do less avoiding of uncomfortable questions about life and death, and allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to just sit with it and see what happens as the feelings come. And be willing to look at those things. I think we do a lot as humans, we figured out a lot of ways to avoid looking at these big questions of life and death, food and drugs and sex and shopping and work and name it, right? How many ways can a human be sort of in an unhealthy relationship to experiences or substances that take us away? Whereas nature just sort of invites us in, sit down and see what the bees are up to, or feel your bare feet. I love to walk barefoot in the morning. For me, that's a really restorative practice. It takes 5 minutes. Take your shoes off and go outside and put your feet on the earth. Yeah. Changes the whole day.
Yeah. No, it really does. I always make the running joke, and now it's, again, 4 dogs. It's like, and you just do your best to avoid,
yes,
a few little deposits. It's just like, and I'm not being gross about it, and I'm not trying to even be silly about it. It's just like, get past all that stuff. And it's really interesting. It's, I also found during the pandemic, I learned a lot. I chose to expand myself uncomfortably in ways that I knew that I did not want to turn around, whether it was 14 days, which I knew it was never, I knew it was going to be no less than 2 years. And whether you call that my intuition or my pre-med or whatever, and I'm not trying to be right, and I'm not trying to be cocky about my gut feeling. I stated it very quietly to certain people, and they're like, no. And I was like, just watch. This is not going to happen overnight.
No.
And there's no possible way when you've got a world pandemic that's going to happen. So I ended up exposing myself to lots of different energies, good, bad, or otherwise. And I invested in myself, and it cost me economically, but in a way that I'm happy that I took those leaps of faith, because it was basically like, it was my way of taking myself back to different forms of education, of exposure, which I could then say whether I liked or I didn't like, or I agree or I don't agree, and what I could take away and not take away. And what it also allowed me to do was to evolve into uncomfortable places that, you know, the running joke is with initial people I was connecting with on social media that, you know, I didn't have time to be on social media. If I'm on social media, my face is in the phone or in a computer, I'm definitely not doing my work on a film set. There is no guarantee. There's absolute truth to that. But when I started to do these random connections with people because of starting an athleisure business or what have you, the running joke was like, how do you plug this headphone in? You know, like, how am I going to launch a podcast, you know, that I wanted to do 6 years at that point prior? Like, so that was like the running joke, things that not about me, but if it could be of inspiration. Now, what I find is so interesting right now in this pandemic state of being that people think we're out of and past, and don't think that I don't want to think that, but we're not, in the sense that, you know, like, I mean, you know.
Yeah, the great teacher COVID is still around.
She is still around.
The lessons have not yet been learned, I would say, entirely.
No. And you know, it's funny, I heard this advertisement in the last few weeks from LA Children's Hospital that, you know, we were wearing masks and gloves long before the pandemic for the very reasons that we needed to protect the children that were sick in this environment. And we will continue to wear masks and gloves because, medicinally speaking, this is what we do. This is how we practice safety and practice medicine. And I tell the story of the January before the pandemic hit, that I was in the trailer I was working in, and working with a lead actor, and there, and I adore this person, but this person who also took care of him came in on an early Monday morning, and before they even broke through the threshold of the door, I knew that they were virally ill. And I gave them a look like, what are you doing here? Like, you step a foot in here and you will proceed to cast a viral shadow across this whole place. And number one will be taken out. And this will be a rock in the water effect. And I immediately went to my drawer and I got a K95 mask and gloves. And if you could see the amount of eyes that rolled, like I had a horn coming out of my forehead. Yep. And I was coming from a pre-med mentality of, this is what you do because you can't get sick and you're touching people and blah, 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 because I always had that in my arsenal, so to speak. And I think to myself that, you know, these are the simple ways that we show our love.
Yes.
And our compassion.
Yes.
And our sense of responsibility and our sense of accountability. And look, none of us do it perfectly. This is not like, oh, whoa, pat me on the back. Aren't I great? Look at what I did before the fact. No, that's not what I'm saying. I was grateful I had that mask, and I was grateful I had those gloves, because I know how you know, with my own challenges of things that I've had to deal with, that there's no way I can take that risk of exposure.
Right.
Period.
A similar scenario with that.
Yeah.
It gives us possibly a greater appreciation for those who are vulnerable, because because we have our own vulnerability in that realm. But it also begs the question, as far as I'm concerned, what is going on with the people who are saying, I'm not wearing a mask, you can't take away my freedom? It's like, wait a minute, your freedom, there's no corollary between your freedom and the well-being of others. These are mutually exclusive things. But if you have any empathy in your heart, you will do what you need to do to protect your fellow human or other creatures. I mean,
as a community,
because
as civilization, humanity,
because every life matters.
Yeah,
every single life matters.
Yeah,
It's a sad situation. I think that's a part of what divides us as a society, is the division between those who want to prioritize the well-being of others, recognize the connection of all, and those who are adamantly opposed to anything that they feel threatens their personal freedom and convenience. It's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. I mean, I can only speak on, what choices we've made, not only for health reasons to stay safe, but because of our careers and what's required of us. So therefore, what we have and haven't done on our days off. I mean, to this day, we've literally only socialized once in our home with a very small group of friends that we always broke bread with for all holidays. And there was only 6 of us outside. And I started out masked. It wasn't only until like halfway through, and this is like over a year ago now, definitely over a year ago. There's a lot of business events I have not attended, from Miami to San Diego and all over to Utah. We have not seen our family. Randy, actually, I take that back. Saw his family once when he went down. This is sadly ironic. When he went down to Houston and happened to see his mother and sister for the first time since the Christmas before the pandemic. And he happened to have been filming the Amazon concert where all those people got killed, and was right in the middle of all of that. So that was a whole other, crazy life experience. But, and yet I do, as I'm sure you do, know people who are just gallivanting about all over the place. And, I mean, I even have work events coming up that I like, do I, don't I? Yeah. And it is really interesting what you get to witness about people without trying to stay in judgment. But I also what I wanted to comment on was, I love how people, and look at, this is not me throwing stones, because I look at myself first before I want to make these statements. But as this pandemic has evolved, and as people's businesses have evolved on social media or online, or connected that way in ways that we would never have connected in many cases. And I've been grateful for that ability to connect with many people I would never have the opportunity to meet prior or since if it weren't for technology advancements. I also find it very interesting still how people want to say, oh, well, for instance, I've done a lot with these investments. People still want to put you in a box.
Yeah.
And I have to think to myself, why do I feel bad? Why do I feel bad after dropping what I've dropped or invested? Why do I feel bad? Because I think to myself, in this case of a meeting I had this morning, one person was talking about how they have a program to talk to women between the ages of 30 and 50 and all about their God and community. And I said to them, well, what about the rest of the women? What about the women who come who are younger, let alone people who lived a little bit longer and maybe have a little bit more wisdom about community and life experience? Like, well, this is my niche. Okay, but okay, thank you for sharing. I come off like the person who can't be focused. I can't focus on one thing. And it's interesting about, I go back to your book.
Mhm.
I think to myself, Fred the caterpillar, we know is, if he doesn't get eaten before he has the opportunity to monetize into the butterfly or materialize into the butterfly, there's different scenarios that could or couldn't happen. Why are we and you as an educator, and this is my point, why do we have this need to tell people that if they don't have a clear message, then they're not going to make an impact, or they're not going to be able to magnetize the money that they're going to need to make, or that they're not going to be able to lead accordingly or speak appropriately? And I just think to myself, well, maybe you weren't born with 20 different talents.
I think clarity of messaging is a part of the machine. Do you know what I'm saying?
I agree.
I mean, that if you listen to sort of like high level business conversations, predominantly led by wealthy men, they talk a lot about clarity of messaging, and there are all these kind of rules about who gets to have the podium. For a very long time, it was never women. And even now, it's primarily not women. And still to this day, women are, we're underpaid compared to our male counterparts. There's all kinds of ways. And I love men. I'm not making a statement about men in general. But the stuff like clarity of messaging and the way that our media works in this country and the way that our government works in this country has everything to do with keeping us in our place. And if they tell us that we don't have a clear message, we're more likely to be quiet. Rather than if you come up in an educational system or in a family where you're taught from the very beginning, your voice is important. I love to talk with children about writing, even 4-year-olds, because I always say the same thing. I always say that when you write a word that comes from within you, you're an author now. You're an author. You don't have to publish a book to be an author, because they need to understand that their words matter, whatever they're thinking. And it doesn't matter if anybody agrees with you or not. For you to be able to express a thought, a unique thought, your perspective on something that you've seen or heard or read or whatever, that is a very empowering perspective. But we live within a system that wants to keep us down, wants to keep us quiet, wants to keep us purchasing a lot of shit that we don't need, wants to keep us looking the other way when there's abuse and racism and inequity and all of that. The system wants to keep itself stable, and we destabilize it with our voices where we're talking about the things that not everybody wants to talk about. So there's a strong push for homeostasis in the system. Don't change. This is the way we've always done it. Our forefounders said this. I mean, we're all arguing about the Constitution. It's like this group of racist men wrote this thing, and we're arguing about whether it's contemporary. I mean, of course it isn't. Of course it isn't.
No, it's not. And I will also say this isn't just men.
You're right. There are lots of women who support that party line too.
I will say in this particular scenario, this is a group of women. This is a group of women who are trying to find their niche, and to be surrounded by women who are not, in my humble opinion, open to the possibility of somebody might have more of a layered perspective.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I think to myself, my story is not your story, but my story is many people's story.
Yeah.
And if I can be effective or draw in people the way I do, I'm not here to be formulaic, because I'm not formulaic.
Thank goodness.
I'm not. Pardon?
Thank goodness. Formulaic
Well,
is so boring. Formulas are so boring, I think. There's nothing captivating or compelling about formulaic messaging about anything. Once again, I think people are drawn to it though, because it's like the little package. Here you go. Here's a belief system for you people who haven't developed your own. Great. Fine. I'll do what you tell me to do, because I'm not interested in thinking about what I want to do.
Man, I am so like connecting back to my little girl self at this point, and want to say to all those people, you can all have that. You can all stroke that, whatever you're stroking. I never was that kid. I certainly wasn't that young woman, and I'm definitely not that woman at this stage of the game. And even though I've been trying to figure it out, I think I've gotten it figured out. I'm exactly where I'm at. I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. And I think I always have, celebrate those individuals, keyword, who I want to raise up as individuals, and whatever that's applicable to, as long as it's harmless and it's inspirational and it's authentic and, accountable and valued and moral, whatever that means, but in a way that, again, I start with the word harmful, not harmful, because as we both know, there's plenty of individuals with lots of different approaches to lots of different things. Can't be harmful, but I definitely have gotten to this place, and I just think to myself, I should never invest in, and this is a lesson to many, do not invest in something that's going to make you feel bad, or when you realize it makes you feel bad, stand back and go, no. Dong, 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 red flags.
Yeah, I think it's a profound self-awareness when you can recognize, I don't like who I am in relationship to that thing or that person or that institution. I'm not my best self in that scenario. And to be able to walk away and say, that's okay. Change is inevitable. Wherever, so many people stay in situations in which they're not happy because they're more afraid of the change than they are of the pain of staying.
Yeah. And I think that's like the fire that has lit me. And this goes back to all the things we started this conversation with, and I'm just going back to my notes, energy of transformation, miracles of the unknown, being a visionary means that you don't have to know the end result. You can put it out into the world, and then through the process of manifestation and through the process of evolution, do things materialize into your reality. I certainly know I learned that from a very young age.
Yeah, me too.
Very young age. We are lucky. And I share that because I didn't know that plastering my walls above my desk at age 8 and 9 years of age would become my reality as a successful career and award-winning and the kind of people I'd be working with. And that's just one little aspect of things. That's not all so important. It's just what is possible because anything is possible if you put it out to the world,
If
you know, and
imagination.
correct.
Oh, I think I said
that is,
I said that in the book.
yes.
I started reading about what happens inside the chrysalis, and I was like, what?
Yes.
The caterpillar completely becomes liquefied. And then these cells create this butterfly, and the cells are called imaginal. And my takeaway was like, the imagination is the spark of the transformation. So, and we already know this, right? If you can't imagine yourself in different circumstances, you're probably not going to ever be in different circumstances. Daydreaming is one of the best things a kid can do. And yet in traditional education systems, not always valued. Like, pay attention, we'll
Yeah.
But daydreaming is the birthplace of transformation. Imagine
Magic.
dreaming. It's magic. And and it's okay that the adults don't understand what's happening in there. It's not your business. It's that child's dream, that child's imagination.
That's where the wings come to have the freedom to fly.
Yeah.
And
so
to
cool.
dance in the landscape and twitter about.
I'm really envious that you have those monarchs, and of course my friend Maris in Santa Cruz, the whole thing happened because we were on a Zoom call during COVID. She's sitting out on her terrace in Santa Cruz, and there are just these butterflies all around. And I'm like, I can't even hear what you're saying because I'm like mesmerized by the butterflies behind you. And so she's showing me her milkweed plants and, oh yeah, and look at all the caterpillars. And I said, I wish when I was a child, we had monarch butterflies in Oregon. I never see monarchs here anymore. Saw them a lot when I was a kid. And she said, well, I'm going to bring you a milkweed. And that's how the whole thing started, was just like me just glimpsing her environment and going like, oh my God, that's beautiful.
Well, speaking of which, so little Delila.
Yeah.
What was little Delila dreaming about?
I was extraordinarily shy. I'm still very shy. I hate being able to see myself on the screen. I've learned how to operate in the world with people because of my work, but it's been a process. But when I was a little child, I was so shy, and I was very, very blessed to have a mom and a grandmother who really walked close to the earth. Both gardeners, they tended animals, they anthropomorphized every animal. Like my mother named squirrels and slugs and crows, and my gram had like a wild wolf that she fed. And, so I was surrounded by these people who were interested in plants and animals and children. And so I collected things from the time I was tiny. I had baskets filled with feathers and rocks and whatever, all kinds of stuff that I found. And even in my adulthood, my grandmother and I had a tradition when I lived in Texas early in my teaching career. Both of us loved the autumn leaves, and we would always bring each other leaves. And so then we started mailing each other. She mailed me leaves from home so I could show them to the children. And so I had the benefit of being with people who really walked close to nature, and being, my grandmother was a big teacher for me, teaching me about, putting my hands into the soil and closing my eyes and feeling what's happening under there with the roots, and understanding the relationship between what happens deep in the darkness with those roots. And then we trust and trust and trust that there's going to be something that becomes visible. But even before it's visible, we tend it. we water it and we feed it. And we, my grandmother was not a religious person. My mother was. And I asked my grandmother one time, we were blueberry picking, and I asked her if she believed in God, because I was aware that my parents were concerned about maybe she didn't. I said, Graham, do you believe in God? And she said, God is in the blueberries. So I was really lucky because I had these influences that were, just sort of like willing to answer my questions, and lots of time outdoors in nature. I think that's the best way for a kid to, that was my safe place. Nature was my safe place.
So while you were in that safe place, what did you dream of becoming? Did you dream of becoming, what was it that like lit you up in addition to, like, did you see yourself going down that path? Like what? Well,
I started singing in choir when I was 5, and I loved singing. I loved being part of the community of choral music. And so when I started college, I thought what I wanted to study, be a music teacher. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I started taking care of children when I was like 10 years old. People would leave their kids for the weekend with me because I was so shy and responsible, And then I found out that music education was not exactly what I had in mind.
mm-hmm.
But I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then a friend of my mother's offered me a job as an assistant at this Montessori school right next to the University of Oregon campus. But they didn't give me the job until I spent a day observing. Observation is the core of Montessori education. Carefully watching what children are showing you. Rather than figuring out what you're going to teach, you watch to see what the children need. And I was mind blown in that. I mean, I remember I was 21 and I was sitting in this classroom and I was watching these children and these adults being so kind and respectful. And there was no raised voices and there was nobody telling anybody what to do. And it was just like peaceful and beautiful. And in that moment, I thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. So I was really blessed to figure it out early. And then, spent a few years as an assistant, got my teacher training, and in some way or another have been involved with it ever since.
You really, really were lucky. Yeah. I have to say.
I was.
To know that to recognize that was your path and your purpose and your passion all combined at such a young age, and that you've been able to be aligned with that all this time. Wow, that's powerful.
There were periods of time where I did other things to try to support. I was a single mother. There's not a lot of money to be made in Montessori education. So there were times when I had to step away and make money in other ways. I had a copywriting business for a while. I had a marketing business for a while, but my life work is Montessori education. Yeah.
And so, since your life work is Montessori education, and being that you're still young, yes, you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Struggling inventing the big 6-0 birthday. I don't know why, but I am. I'm a little bit like, yeah.
Is it a marking point that has you thinking, reflecting?
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, I would say that it is. It's interesting that it's, coming up kind of with all this pandemic kinds of things. I don't think it's so much of like an existential crisis around the number as it is just really wanting to be intentional about where I spend my time and with whom. So it's good. It's good.
It's great. It's great. And that's really important. And I think that's a great place to be. And my wisdom it's gonna, just my perspective is just go with that, fly that kite.
Yeah.
Because you'll be perfect and great. And I think one of the things that I learned at a very young age, I think I was in the ages of where you were getting your early Montessori schooling administrative experience. So when I was starting the fashion beauty world of make-believe, illusion delusion, as I call it,
or creating beautiful art. How about that?
I was creating beautiful art. Or putting Humpty Dumpty back on the wall, however you want to call,
Right.
And I say that with love, by the way, and I'd like to say, because the power of transformation I could channel through my eyes and my hands and create those living sculptures. So I'm proud, certainly. But I would also come home and question my contribution and the delusion and the unfortunate, message that we're sending our society of what's valued and what's not. Like, I think that there's health, and I think that and I understand health equals wealth, and I understand that we as animals are attracted to spots, and, we're attracted to different spots per the animal that we are. And there's a game that we play within all of that. And there's the survivor of the fittest through all of that, but that does not negate the importance of all. And, shouldn't devalue one versus the other. But we definitely have this system, no pun intended, in place of what is considered. But, for each person or persons, there's that different thing that we're drawn to. So I know that in that way, I know that I'm a storyteller through that. So I choose to, keep it into that realm of storytelling versus the negative part that I contribute. But I was taught at a very young age. This man is still alive. He was at the time a very well-known fashion photographer who happened to come to Rockford, Illinois, and drop into this indoor tennis club that I was helping manage while I was going to college. So I was, 19 at the time, 18 or 19. And he came with this couple. And one thing led to another, and he told me about all these Vogue spreads he had currently. And I was like, yeah, great, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I was, couldn't have really cared less, but yet, yeah, okay, that's great. That's interesting. And, oh, you should come see me sometime. And I was like, why would I come see you? I mean, it was such a random statement. Why would I come see you? It wasn't anything remotely I was going to be a part of. Cut to, literally 5 years later, my agent is sending me to this man's studio. I mean, talk about foreshadowing in a story.
I love it.
And there I am standing there in his studio, and he's like, I don't know that we'll ever work together. I love your work. But, at that point, his career was winding down. And he went and he says, and I know that you think you should be able to, and I was 24 at the time. I know you should be already at a certain place, blah, 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 because you've had all this life experience. And he went to the wall and he pulled down this framed piece of copy, and he takes it out of the frame and he slips it in his Xerox machine, not a printer, a Xerox machine, and makes a copy and pulls it out and hands me a copy. And he says, and what does this say? And there's a column of numbers from number 9 to 101. And next to each number was a name. And next to each name was what they did. The 9-year-old, whose name I forget, was a prince that had become a king because his father had died.
Wow.
And the list goes on to the 101-year-old. And he said, Felicia, what's the average age on this list? And I said, 57. He says, right. And who is that? And I said, Ray Kroc. And he said, right. And what did he do? And I said, began McDonald's. And he said, yeah, that's right. He said, so I know you think, and this is my message to you, I know you think that you are supposed to already become and be the thing that you think you're here to be. But how I see you is somebody who's going to get a lot more life experiences and evolve into this being. And you're not going to come into yourself until much later in life.
I mean, I think it's an evolution for all of us, right? I would not want to go backwards, right? Like I see the number 60 and I go, oh, that's a good number. I would not want to go backwards for anything. I wouldn't go back to 21 or 31 or 51. That's the blessing of the path of, observation and awareness. We're all learning from one another, and life, I think, does get better when we can appreciate that, even though sometimes more painful too, with the little achy hips and whatever, right?
But I definitely think that perspective is a gift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that if you surround yourself with healthy, positive people who cherish the gifts that you bring to the table, the wisdom, the perspective, the knowledge, the collective, then you get to relish in the beautiful flower and butterfly that you are, and that you're here to be and shine upon and show others and inspire others how to gracefully live into that as well.
Thank you.
Because I'm so, well, I didn't mean to cut you off. You're welcome. And I think that's the truth. And I had this theory at 18 that it was a very quiet theory, but I definitely am speaking it out loud now more than ever. Even in my moments of, I have no idea where I'm going, because I really do have lots of those moments. And I don't think that that's a bad thing to say, even though I love this platform. I'm so grateful I've created this piece of art that every week I show up and keep having these interactions with amazing human beings like yourself, and get to have these conversations that I get to share with others, and, have this connection around the campfire, because this to me is like what life is all about. Okay. But I do believe that there is the concept of becoming like a fine wine.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know who so lovely speaks about that is Helen Mirren.
Oh, well, no, I didn't know that, but I definitely thought that since I was 18. I'm going to become like a fine wine. I'm going to be better in my 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s than I ever was in my teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, or even 50s. And what I think on that is the difference, and I know this is I find that we were born in an era where we had a lot of wisdom to observe and learn from, that gave us perspective going forward. And we have a lot of wonderful humans that are coming up from, birth to coming into the world to have their voices heard. A little bit of the difference that I observe is that I don't know that I, in my 20s or 30s, thought I was all-knowing. I thought I had been affected a lot and certainly lived a lot and had seen a lot by my life experiences. But I still respected people who were older than me, who brought to the table something that I don't observe. And I'm not alone in this, by the way. I have a lot of people share with me, what is it? And don't get me wrong, if you're a younger generation, I just think that you can learn something from people who came before you. And what we're going through right now with women alone, where you and I were raised in that era where women couldn't even have their own check count. They
Right.
couldn't buy a house. They couldn't have a career. They couldn't even use their own name and had to be Miss or Mrs. There was no such thing as Ms.
Yeah.
And you had to sign it that way. You couldn't just be like Felicia Linsky. It had to have a title in front of it.
Right.
And I think that this lack of perspective and honoring history, and don't get me wrong, it's not about staying stuck. It's about understanding history of what came before you, to understand the shoulders that you're standing on that give you the platform and the leverage to become who you are becoming today, and the voices you get to be yelling at the top of the mountain with. And look at, this, when you met me, I had just come out of my first bout of cancer. I was about to go through my second bout of cancer, and having now gone through 4 bouts, having my voice, I'm lucky. Yeah. And so using this platform and helping others and share voices together of our experiences and have our own conversation through our own exchange is so important. This is another form of not only entertainment, but teaching.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the people coming up now, it's a generalization, right? We don't want to make it because they're so brilliant.
Yeah.
But they have a disadvantage in one way. And that is that there are so many more distractions in the world of technology. There are so many different places to put your attention that can be distractions more than contributions to your learning and growth. I see that a lot. And I see that I think it's an overwhelming time to be a young person in the world. It's an overwhelming time to be thinking about maybe what is my purpose here. I know that that's been true for my son.
Yeah.
A young adult. There's a lot about what's happening to the earth and in general in this country that's pretty intense and not entirely hopeful.
No. And like your son, because how old is your son again? I forget. He's 27. Yeah. So our nieces are just turned 25 and about to turn 22. And our 25-year-old is the top of her law school class in environmental law.
Awesome.
And I'm like, sister, you're going straight to the White House and changing the world. Like, I don't care, whether it's the White House or whatever, you stay at top of that game so you can really use your voice for a reason. Because she was a young ranger, a female ranger in the Northwest. I was like, get out of USC, go back to the Northwest, get into Washington, University of Washington, go do all those interns that you were doing in high school.
Yeah.
Would be with the top people and pave your way, pave it in a way that's powerful in every way possible, because you know about the earth, because you've walked this earth and you have a place to voice it in the right way. You can write, you can speak, you can teach, you can do things with the justice system. Go do it. And then our other niece is in New Mexico as an artist and student, doing her own thing too with the way she's contributing. And so I have a great love for these kids.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. And these kids aren't on social media. They have nothing to do with social media.
That's really true. My son's not on social media either. Which is good, I think. Although
I do, because
I value my social media contacts. I have, you mentioned it earlier in this conversation, there are people that I connect with here in the online platform that I would never see in real life or might not know. And that's a beautiful thing.
100%.
Yeah.
I can gleefully speak on my 2 female producers who produce my show for me. they're, they're also in their 20s. I would never have connected. They were the ones who said, "Oh my God, you've got to do you of all people have got to do a podcast." And I was like, "Don't blow smoke up my dress." And they're like, "No, no, no, no. We're not blowing smoke up your dress." And they were the ones who helped me get to this place. And that's a beautiful thing. And I honor Katie and Melissa for that. So on my last question for you, after this beautiful time spending together, and I thank you, is what would you want your legacy to be going forward over the next, 30 or 40 years? What would you like to inspire going forward?
I have a vision for writing a whole series of these animal stories. Some of them inspired by experiences from my childhood, and some inspired by just observations now. And I'm excited about that as a point of, conversation. And I think it's never been more important for us to remember, from whence we come. We come from this earth. We have to remember that. So many distractions, so many ways for us to feel separate from it, but we're not. So I'd like to think that I can make a contribution in that way. And, it's great because then I can read my books to children, and that makes me really happy.
Yeah. Oh my God, the best. Well, again, if they're anything like Fred the Monarch with their own individual story and message, so powerful, such a contribution, such a positive legacy to contribute to the world in so many ways, Delila Olsson.
Thank you so
much. I love you so
much. Yeah, I love you so much. This was fun.
This was a blast. Everybody, go out and find on Amazon Fred the Monarch, A Tale of Transformation and Hope. It will be a great holiday gift, a great gift in the classroom, a great gift to share for people to be inspired and reminded of what we're all doing here. And next week, I look forward to sharing my conversation with, again, another dear friend of mine, a powerful businesswoman, Julie Nostrand, who I have aligned with over the last decade, that is creating a beautiful brand called South Sea Skincare. That is a global brand that I am so proud to be a part of her journey, and look forward to you joining me around the campfire next week. So in the meantime, much love. Thank you for joining. Share, subscribe, and tell all your friends about the Camp Fifi Uncensored podcast, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are vast. Much love, big hugs and kisses. Bye for now.